An 8-year-old boy in a wheelchair rolled up to a Hells Angels president outside a Florida diner and asked him the most devastating question a man can hear. "Can you be my dad for just one day?" What happened next became hell for a man who truly should love him. But before we go deep in this, where are you watching this from right now? I need to know how far this story reaches across America. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see every state represented. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Now let's get into the story. The parking lot of Ruby's Diner off Exit 23 on I-95 in Fort Lauderdale wasn't the kind of place where miracles happened. It was the kind of place where truckers grabbed burnt coffee at 4 a.m. and bikers stopped to let their engines cool before pushing north toward West Palm Beach or south toward Miami. The asphalt was cracked, stained with decades of oil and regret, and the neon sign that promised best pancakes in Florida had been flickering the same since 1987. But on that Sunday morning in October, something shifted in that parking lot. Something that would crack open the heart of a man who'd spent 20 years building walls around it. Francisco "Cisco" Porter stood with his back against his Harley, arms crossed over a chest that carried scars from Fallujah and bar fights he'd rather forget. 6'2", 240 pounds of muscle and ink, beard streaked with gray, eyes that had seen men die and had made peace with the fact that he'd helped some of them get there. He was 43 years old and the president of the Hells Angels Fort Lauderdale chapter, which meant he was responsible for 78 brothers who'd ride into hell if he asked. And some days, he did ask. He was talking strategy with Bear, his road captain, a mountain of a man who'd done 2 tours as a Marine and could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded, about their annual Toys for Tots run when he noticed the other conversations around him dying, one by one, like dominoes falling into silence. Knuckles stopped mid-sentence about his ex-wife's lawyer. Reaper put down his cigarette. Jax, the youngest prospect at 24, actually took a step back. They were all looking at something across the parking lot, and when Cisco followed their eyes, he understood why the world had just stopped spinning. A kid, maybe 8 years old, wheelchair, the kind with the thick tires that meant it wasn't temporary, wasn't something you recovered from. He wore a blue hoodie that was 3 sizes too big, probably a hand-me-down from whatever foster home he was cycling through, and his wheels were caked with mud like he'd been rolling through unpaved streets just to get here. But it wasn't the wheelchair that made grown men go silent. It wasn't even the way the kid's hands were shaking as he rolled himself slowly across the cracked asphalt toward 12 Hells Angels who looked like they'd eaten children for breakfast. It was the piece of paper in his lap, white, wrinkled, stained with something that might have been grape juice or tears, and written across it in purple crayon, shaky letters that looked like they'd taken an hour to form, was one word: Dad? Cisco felt his stomach drop. Not the adrenaline drop you get before a fight. The kind of drop that happens when you realize you're about to hear something that will change you. The boy stopped about 3 feet away, just outside the invisible perimeter where most civilians knew not to cross when bikers were congregating. His eyes were brown, too big for his face, and they carried the kind of exhaustion that didn't belong on a kid who should have been worried about homework and video games. He looked at Cisco specifically, not at Bear, not at the others, at the president, like he'd done his research, like he knew who made the decisions. And then the boy spoke, his voice so quiet Cisco had to lean forward to hear it over the distant hum of I-95 traffic. "Sir, can you be my dad for just one day?" The question hung in the Florida air like smoke. Bear's jaw actually dropped. Knuckles looked away, blinking hard. Reaper muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. And Cisco felt something crack inside his chest. Not a hairline fracture, a full detonation? Because he knew that question. He'd asked it himself when he was 9 years old, standing in a social worker's office in Tampa, begging them to find him a family that would keep him longer than 6 months. The kid kept talking, faster now, like he was terrified Cisco would walk away before he finished. Tomorrow's Bring Your Parent to School Day at Palmetto Elementary. My foster mom said she's too busy because she's got 4 other kids, and one of them has a doctor's appointment, and I don't have anybody else to ask, and I know you don't know me, but I've seen you here before, and you look like—" His voice cracked, shattered. "You look like the kind of dad who shows up." Cisco crouched down slowly, his knees protesting, until he was eye level with the boy. Up close he could see the details that made his blood boil, the cast on the kid's left wrist that was covered in cruel Sharpie drawings. Cripple. Wheelchair boy. Metal legs. The backpack hanging off the wheelchair that was duct-taped at the seams. The shoes that were 2 sizes too small because nobody had bothered to check if they still fit. "What's your name, son?" Cisco's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Treasure." The kid said it like he was apologizing for it. "I know it's a weird name. My real dad picked it before he left, said I was going to be his treasure, but then I was born and the doctor said I'd never walk right, and he—" Treasure stopped, swallowed. "He said broken things aren't treasures, they're burdens." Cisco heard Bear inhale sharply behind him, heard Jax whisper, "Jesus Christ." And in that moment, Francisco Porter made a decision that would violate every rule the club had about maintaining a low profile, staying out of civilian problems, and not drawing attention from cops, social workers, or the media. He reached out and took the crayon drawing from Treasure's lap, studied it carefully, the word Dad, surrounded by stick figures of motorcycles, and then looked the boy straight in the eyes. "What time do I need to be there?" Treasure's eyes went wide like Cisco had just promised him the moon. "You mean it? You'll really come?" His voice cracked with hope that had been beaten down too many times, and Cisco saw the fear underneath, the terror that this was another lie, another adult who'd say the right thing and then disappear like morning fog off the Everglades. Cisco didn't make promises lightly. In 20 years of wearing the Hells Angels patch, he'd learned that your word was the only currency that mattered when money and muscle failed. So when he nodded and said, 8 o'clock sharp, Palmetto Elementary, he meant it with every scar on his body. But Treasure wasn't done. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, smoothed it on his lap with trembling hands, and held it up. It was a crayon drawing, crude but heartbreaking in its honesty. Stick figures, one big, one small. The big one had a beard, the small one had wheels. Above them, in that same shaky purple crayon, "Friends ride together." "I drew this," Treasure whispered, "in case you needed to remember what I look like. Or in case—" He stopped, bit his lip. "In case you forgot." Cisco took the drawing carefully, like it was made of glass, and tucked it into his vest pocket right over his heart. "I won't forget, brother. That's a promise." The word brother hit Treasure like electricity. His whole face transformed. For maybe the first time in his 8 years on Earth, someone had called him family. Cisco stood, his knees cracking, and watched Treasure roll himself back across the parking lot toward a rusted Toyota Corolla where a tired-looking woman in scrubs was waiting. His foster mom, probably. Working double shifts at some hospital in Deerfield Beach or Pompano, trying to keep 5 kids fed on a system that paid her $450 a month per child and expected miracles. When the Corolla drove off, trailing blue smoke, Bear stepped up beside Cisco. "You know what you just signed us up for?" His voice was quiet, careful. "School full of parents. Cops, probably. Media if someone gets jumpy and calls Channel 7 saying Hell's Angels invaded an elementary school. Cisco turned to face his road captain, and the other brothers closed in. Knuckles, Reaper, Jax, all of them waiting to see if their president had lost his mind. "I know exactly what I signed us up for," Cisco said. "Question is, are you in or out?" Reaper lit another cigarette, took a long drag, and said what they were all thinking. "That kid asked for one day. One dad. You planning to show up solo? Or you planning to show him what family really looks like?" And that's when Cisco knew this wasn't just about keeping a promise to an 8-year-old. This was about proving something to a country that had written off both Treasure and every man standing in this parking lot as lost causes. Bear grinned, showing the gap where a bar fight in Jacksonville had cost him a molar. "We're calling church tonight. Full chapel. Every brother in South Florida needs to hear this." By the time Cisco got back to the clubhouse on Powerline Road, word had already spread the way it always did in the Brotherhood. Text messages, phone calls, the invisible network that connected 78 Hells Angels from Key West to Stewart. The parking lot was already full when he pulled in at sunset, bikes lined up like soldiers waiting for orders. Inside, the clubhouse smelled like motor oil, leather, and the kind of history you couldn't wash out of walls that had witnessed 30 years of brotherhood, tragedy, and triumph. The main room was standing room only. Prospects stood against the back wall. Full patch members filled the chairs. Officers sat at the head table. Bear, Knuckles, Reaper, and Jax, waiting for Cisco to call the meeting to order. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., I need every brother who can ride to meet here. We're escorting a kid to school." Silence. Then Knuckles, the treasurer and the most practical bastard in the room, asked the question everyone was thinking. Why? Cisco pulled the crayon drawing from his vest pocket and held it up so every man in that room could see it. The stick figures, the wheelchair, the word "Dad" in purple crayon that looked like it had been written by hands that shook from hope and fear in equal measure. Because this 8-year-old kid rolled up to Ruby's diner today and asked me to be his father for one day. Not his buddy, not his mentor, his dad. For bring your parent to school day at Palmetto Elementary. He paused, let that sink in. His real father, some piece of trash named Austin Welch, walked out the day Treasure was born because the doctors said he'd never walk right. Kid's been in foster care since he was 2. 6 families, 6 rejections, and tomorrow every other kid at that school is going to show up with their mom or dad or someone who gives a damn, and Treasure was going to show up with nobody. The room stayed quiet, but Cisco could see it working on them. These weren't Boy Scouts. These were men who'd done time, who'd fought wars, who'd buried brothers and made peace with violence as a tool when diplomacy failed. But they were also men who understood loyalty, who knew what it meant to be abandoned by the system that was supposed to protect you. His foster mom told him she's too busy, Cisco continued, his voice hardening. Too busy with 4 other kids to take 2 hours off work to show this boy he matters. So he came to us, to me, to men the rest of America thinks are criminals and thugs, and he asked us to be his family. Jax, the youngest prospect, spoke up from the back. What happens if we roll up 89 deep to an elementary school? You know how that's going to look on the news? You know the calls the principal's going to make before we even park. It was a fair point. In 2023, America was terrified of everything. Terrified of bikers, terrified of men who looked dangerous, terrified of anything that didn't fit the sanitized suburban dream they sold on HGTV. Rolling nearly 90 Hells Angels onto school property was the kind of thing that got SWAT teams called and local politicians screaming about public safety. But Bear stood up, all 6'5" and 300 pounds of him, and his voice cut through the doubt like a chainsaw through pine. Let 'em call. Let 'em panic. Let 'em write their think pieces about how scary we are. Because when that kid sees us show up, not just Cisco but all of us, he's gonna learn something every child in America should know but most don't. Family shows up. Period. The vote was unanimous. 89 Hells Angels. Every brother who could get the day off work, who could call in favors, who could move heaven and earth to be at the clubhouse by 7:30 a.m. the next morning. But Cisco wasn't done. One more thing, he said, pulling out his phone. I'm calling the Broward County Sheriff's Office tonight. I'm calling the principal of Palmetto Elementary. I'm letting them know we're coming, why we're coming, and that we're not here to start trouble. We're here to keep a promise to a kid who's been lied to his whole life. If they've got a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly. Knuckles raised an eyebrow. You're really going to call the cops? Voluntarily? Cisco smiled, cold and sharp. I'm going to make it so they can't say we ambushed anyone. So when the news cameras show up, and they will, the story is about what we did, not how we scared some soccer moms in a parking lot. After church ended, after the brothers had left to prep their bikes and clear their schedules, Cisco sat alone in the clubhouse staring at Treasure's drawing. He thought about his own childhood, about being 9 years old in Tampa, bouncing between foster homes, asking caseworkers if anyone was ever going to keep him. About learning that the answer was no, that some kids were just too broken, too angry, too much work for families who wanted the Hallmark version of parenthood. He'd survived by building walls, by joining the Marines at 17, by finding Brotherhood in the Corps, and later in the Hells Angels, where your past didn't matter as long as you bled for your brothers. But he'd never let himself be a father. Never let himself get close to that kind of vulnerability. Until today. Until an 8-year-old boy in a wheelchair had rolled up and asked him the one question he'd been running from his whole life. Can you be my dad? Cisco pulled out his phone and made the first call. To Principal Sandra Yates at Palmetto Elementary. She answered on the third ring, and when Cisco explained who he was and why he was calling, there was a long, terrifying silence. Then, Mr. Porter, I appreciate the heads up, but I need to be honest with you. If 89 bikers show up at my school tomorrow, I will have parents calling the superintendent. I will have police here. I will have a situation. Cisco's voice stayed calm, steady. Ma'am, with all due respect, the only situation you're going to have is a boy who's been abandoned his whole life, finally learning that someone kept their promise. We're not coming to intimidate. We're coming to support. And if that scares people, maybe they need to ask themselves why kindness from the wrong-looking people is scarier than cruelty from the right-looking ones. Principal Yates didn't give Cisco an answer that night, just said she'd think about it, and hung up, which in bureaucrat speak meant she was already drafting the email to the superintendent explaining why she might need security tomorrow. Cisco didn't care. He'd done his due diligence. He'd given them warning. What they did with it was their problem. But there was one more stop he needed to make before tomorrow, one more promise he needed to keep. And this one didn't involve phone calls or lawyers or playing nice with administrators who thought good intentions required a background check and 3 forms of ID. At 9 p.m., Cisco pulled up to 4739 SW 58th Avenue in Davie, a duplex that looked like it had been beige in 1987 and had given up trying sometime around the first Bush administration. The paint was peeling. The chain-link fence was held together with baling wire and hope. A busted air conditioning unit sat in the front yard like a tombstone for comfort. This was where Treasure lived, where the foster system had dumped him along with 4 other kids because Linda Reyes was willing to take the cases nobody else wanted for $450 a month per child. Cisco knocked, and after a minute, The door opened to reveal a woman who looked like she'd aged 20 years in the last 5. Mid-40s, maybe, with the kind of exhaustion that came from working doubles at Memorial Regional Hospital and coming home to 5 kids who needed food, homework help, medical appointments, and the kind of emotional support the state of Florida didn't budget for. "Ms. Reyes, I'm Francisco Porter. I met Treasure this morning at Ruby's Diner." Her face shifted through confusion, recognition, and then something that might have been relief or terror. It was hard to tell. "You're the biker, the one he asked to—" She stopped, glanced over her shoulder like she was worried about who was listening. "Come in, please." The inside of the duplex was chaos organized by sheer force of will. 5 kids in a living room barely big enough for 3, bunk beds visible through doorways, a TV playing some cartoon about talking dogs, the smell of spaghetti and exhaustion. Treasure was in the corner, parked by the window, staring out at the street like he was waiting for something that might never come. When he saw Cisco, his face lit up like Christmas morning. "You came! I told him you'd come, but nobody believed me." Cisco crouched down, eye level again, ignoring the pain in his knees that reminded him he wasn't 20 anymore. "I told you I'd be there tomorrow, brother, but I wanted to come by tonight to make sure you knew I meant it, and to ask your foster mom if it's okay if I bring some family with me." Linda looked confused. "Family?" "My brothers. The club. About 89 of us." Her eyes went wide. 89 bikers? At an elementary school? "Mr. Porter, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but—" Cisco raised a hand, gentle but firm. "Ma'am, I've already called the principal. I've already notified the sheriff's office. We're not coming to cause trouble. We're coming to show this boy that when someone makes a promise, they keep it. And that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up." Linda stared at him for a long moment, and Cisco could see her doing the math. She knew what the system had done to Treasure, knew that 6 families had rejected him, knew that tomorrow every other kid would have someone and Treasure would have nobody unless she took time off work she couldn't afford to lose. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay. But Mr. Porter, if this goes sideways, if there's trouble, the state will pull him from my home. They'll say I allowed something dangerous, and I can't lose another placement. These kids are all I have." Cisco stood, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have my word, ma'am. Nothing bad happens to Treasure tomorrow. Or ever, if I can help it." He turned back to the boy, who was watching this exchange like he was watching a miracle happen in real time. "You still got that drawing you made?" Treasure nodded, pulled it from under his leg where he'd been keeping it safe. Cisco studied it again. The stick figure dad with the beard, the stick figure kid in the wheelchair, the words "Friends ride together" in that heartbreaking crayon scrawl. "Can I borrow this tonight? I want to show it to my brothers. Help them understand why we're doing this." Treasure handed it over without hesitation, and Cisco tucked it back in his vest. "Get some sleep tonight, little man. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." As Cisco walked back to his bike, Linda followed him onto the porch. "Mr. Porter, why are you doing this? You don't know him. You don't owe him anything." Cisco looked back at the duplex, at the window where Treasure was pressed against the glass waving, and felt that crack in his chest widen. "Ma'am, I was Treasure when I was 9 years old. Different city, same story. Foster care, no family, nobody who showed up. I survived, but I spent 30 years believing I wasn't worth showing up for. That kid in there, he's 8. He's still got time to learn a different lesson. That he matters, that he's not disposable, that the world isn't just full of people who leave." He started his bike, the engine roaring to life in the quiet Davy night. And if I can teach him that, if 89 of us can prove to one kid that family means something, then maybe we're not just outlaws. Maybe we're something better." He rode off before she could respond, but he saw her in his rearview mirror standing on that sagging porch, wiping her eyes. At 6:30 a.m., the sun was just starting to burn off the morning fog that rolled in from the Everglades, turning Powerline Road into something out of a Western film, all silhouettes and backlight and the promise of something legendary about to happen. The Hells Angels Fort Lauderdale clubhouse parking lot was already packed. 89 Harleys, 89 brothers. The oldest was Clarence Preacher Williams, 72 years old, who'd ridden with the Angels since 1974 and still did 500 miles a week despite the arthritis in his hands. The youngest was Jax, 24, fresh out of the Navy, still learning what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. Between them, mechanics, veterans, business owners, ex-cons, fathers, and men who'd never had kids but understood loyalty better than most people understood breathing. Cisco stood on the clubhouse steps and looked at the assembled brothers. 89 men who'd cleared their schedules, called in favors, told their bosses they'd be late, all because one kid had asked for help. This was what America looked like when you stripped away the politics and the prejudice. This was what family looked like when it wasn't about blood. "Listen up," Cisco's voice cut through the morning air. "We ride in formation, 2 columns, slow and respectful, no revving engines, no burnouts, no giving anyone a reason to call this a spectacle. We're not here to scare people. We're here to support treasure." Bear stepped forward, holding a printed map of the route from the clubhouse to Palmetto Elementary, 7 miles through residential Fort Lauderdale, past strip malls and churches, and the kind of suburban normalcy that usually pretended men like them didn't exist. "We're taking Griffin Road to 441, then cutting over to 68th. The school is expecting us at 7:50. Treasure's first presentation is at 8:15. We've got 25 minutes to get there, park, and not give Principal Yates a heart attack." Knuckles raised a hand. "What's the plan if cops show up?" Cisco had already thought about this. "We comply. We're respectful. We're not giving anyone ammunition to say we were threatening. If they want to run our plates, fine. If they want to escort us, even better. The only thing that matters is that kid sees us walk through that door." The brothers nodded. This wasn't their first rodeo. They knew how to handle law enforcement, how to be firm about their rights without being stupid about their survival. At 7:15 a.m., 89 Harleys fired up in unison, a sound like thunder rolling across South Florida, and the convoy began to roll. They took Griffin Road east, moving at exactly 5 miles under the speed limit, both columns perfectly synchronized. Cars pulled over, people on sidewalks stopped and stared. A few pulled out phones to record. By the time they hit 441, a Broward County Sheriff's patrol car had fallen in behind them, not threatening, just observing. Cisco caught the deputy's eye in his mirror and nodded. The deputy nodded back. Mutual respect between men who understood that most of the time, trouble happened when people stopped communicating. When they turned onto 68th Avenue and Palmetto Elementary came into view, Cisco felt his heart rate kick up. The school was small, maybe 400 students, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers stood out like blood on snow. The parking lot was already filling with minivans and SUVs dropping off kids, parents in business casual, teachers hauling in boxes for presentations. Normal Tuesday morning in suburban Fort Lauderdale. And then 89 Hells Angels rolled in like a locust swarm made of chrome and leather. The effect was immediate. Parents froze. A teacher dropped the box she was carrying. Someone screamed. Actually screamed. And Principal Sandra Yates came bursting out of the front entrance, looking like she was about to have an aneurysm. But Cisco had planned for this. He'd called ahead. He'd warned them. and as he dismounted his Harley and pulled off his helmet, he saw something that made him smile. Treasure, in his wheelchair, being pushed toward the parking lot by Linda Reyes, his face a mixture of disbelief and joy so pure it could have powered the whole city. "You came," Treasure whispered when Cisco reached him. "You all came." Cisco crouched down one more time, looked the boy in the eyes, and said the words that would be replayed on news stations across America for the next month. "Brother, I told you. Family shows up. Always." Principal Yates was trying to maintain control of a situation that had already spiraled beyond anything in her 23 years of public education. She speed-walked toward Cisco with the kind of forced smile administrators use when they're one phone call away from a lawsuit and a headline. "Mr. Porter, I appreciate you calling ahead, but this is more than I expected. We have concerned parents. We have children who are frightened. I need to ask you to—" Cisco cut her off, but his voice stayed respectful, calm. "Ma'am, we're here for exactly 2 hours. Long enough for Treasure to do his presentation. Long enough for him to show his classmates that he has family. Then we leave. No drama. No trouble. You have my word." Yates looked past him at the 89 bikers who'd formed 2 perfect lines from the parking lot to the school entrance. They weren't moving, weren't revving engines, just standing there like soldiers at attention. And Cisco saw the moment her fear shifted into something else, curiosity, maybe even respect. "His presentation is in Mrs. Harrison's second-grade class, room 104. It starts in 10 minutes. She looked at Treasure. "You ready, sweetheart?" Treasure nodded, but Cisco could see the terror underneath the excitement. This was the moment where he'd walk into that classroom with either nobody or with proof that he mattered. Cisco stood, turned to his brothers, and gave the signal. What happened next would be described by witnesses as the most powerful thing they'd ever seen at an elementary school. 89 Hells Angels formed a corridor from the parking lot to the school entrance. 2 lines, facing each other, standing at attention. A pathway of leather and chrome and men who'd seen war and heartbreak and had decided that protecting one kid was worth more than protecting their reputation. And in the middle of it all, Cisco pushed Treasure's wheelchair slowly down that corridor while every biker they passed placed a hand over their heart in respect. Parents who'd been scared 5 minutes ago were now crying. Teachers were filming on their phones. And Treasure was sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe, overwhelmed by the realization that he wasn't alone, that he'd never been alone. He just hadn't found his family yet. When they reached room 104, Mrs. Harrison, a veteran teacher who'd seen everything public education could throw at her, opened the door with tears streaming down her face. "Treasure, everyone's been waiting for you." The classroom went silent when Cisco pushed the wheelchair inside. 22 second graders stared at the massive biker with the scars and the tattoos and the leather vest that said President across the back. And then Treasure raised his hand, pointed at Cisco, and said in a voice that barely shook, "This is my dad. For today, his name is Cisco, and he's a Hell's Angel, and he keeps his promises." The classroom erupted in applause. Not polite kid applause, real, genuine, holy shit, this is amazing applause. And Cisco, who'd faced down insurgents in Fallujah and rival clubs in bar fights from Key West to Jacksonville, felt his throat close up with emotion he'd been suppressing for 43 years. Mrs. Harrison invited him to sit at the back of the classroom while Treasure did his presentation. The boy had prepared a poster board, crude but honest, covered in magazine cutouts of motorcycles and hand-drawn pictures of bikers and the words, "My family," in glitter glue. "I used to think family was about who you're born to," Treasure said, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. "But my real dad left before I could walk, and I've had 6 foster families who didn't want to keep me. So I was wrong. Family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up. And today my family showed up, 89 of them." He turned to look at Cisco, and the smile on his face could have lit up the whole state of Florida. "Cisco's my dad today, but I hope maybe he'll be my dad for more than just today, because I think I'm going to need a family for a long time." The classroom was silent. Mrs. Harrison was openly weeping. And Cisco stood up, walked to the front of the room, and crouched beside Treasure's wheelchair one more time. "Little man, I didn't just come here for today. I came here because you deserve a family that doesn't quit. And if you'll have me, if your foster mom says it's okay, I'd like to be part of your life. Not just for today, for as long as you need me." Treasure threw his arms around Cisco's neck and held on like he was drowning, and Cisco was the only thing keeping him afloat. The story should have ended there. Should have been one perfect day where a kid got what he needed and the bikers rode off into the sunset feeling like they'd done something good. But America doesn't let beautiful things stay simple. By noon, the video of 89 Hells Angels forming a corridor for Treasure had been posted to TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by a dozen different parents and teachers who'd witnessed it. By 3 p.m., it had 5 million views. By midnight, it was on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and every local affiliate from Miami to Seattle. Hells Angels, bikers escort foster child to school, became the feel-good story of the year, the kind of thing that made people believe humanity wasn't completely doomed. News crews showed up at the clubhouse. Reporters wanted interviews. The mayor of Fort Lauderdale called Cisco personally to thank him. Governor Ron DeSantis issued a statement praising the compassion shown by these veterans and community members. It was overwhelming. It was beautiful. And it was about to get very, very complicated, because 200 miles away in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, a man named Austin Welch was scrolling through Facebook when he saw the video of his son, the boy he'd abandoned 8 years ago, being escorted by bikers who were being called heroes. Austin was 34 years old, unemployed, living in his mother's basement, and drowning in child support debt from 2 other kids he'd fathered and forgotten. He'd walked away from Treasure the day the doctors explained the spinal condition that meant years of surgeries and therapy and expenses that insurance would fight every step of the way. He'd told Treasure's mother, Shanice Williams, a nurse who died in a car accident when the boy was 2, that he wasn't built to raise a cripple. That's what he'd said, out loud, to a woman who was begging him to stay. But now, watching this video, watching his son get 50 million views and a presidential mention on Twitter, Austin saw something he'd missed 8 years ago: opportunity. He called his cousin Devin, a legal aid lawyer in Mobile, who owed him money from a poker game. "I need you to file for emergency custody of my son." "Yeah, the one in Florida. The one with the bikers. Tell the court I'm the biological father, and I want my parental rights restored." Devin was confused. "Austin, you signed away your rights when Shanice died. You told the state you didn't want him. Why now?" Austin's voice was cold, calculating. "Because that kid's famous now. And famous kids get opportunities, sponsorships, maybe even a book deal or a movie. And I'm his father. That means I'm entitled to make decisions about his life." He paused. "Plus, the state pays foster care benefits, $450 a month. That's money I'm owed." Devin was silent for a long time. Then, "You're a piece of shit, Austin." "Yeah, but I'm a piece of shit with legal standing. File the paperwork." 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, a process server showed up at the Hells Angels clubhouse with a summons. Austin Welch was filing for emergency custody of Treasure, claiming that Francisco Porter and the Hells Angels were exploiting a vulnerable child for publicity, and that as the biological father, he had the right to resume custody. Cisco read the document 3 times, his hands shaking with rage. Linda Reyes called him an hour later, crying, "They're saying I allowed Treasure to be endangered. CPS is opening an investigation. If Austin wins, they'll take him from me. And if they take him from me, he goes back to Austin or into state custody. Either way, we lose him." Cisco called an emergency meeting. Every officer, every brother who'd been part of that ride, Bear, Knuckles, Reaper, Jax, all of them crammed into the clubhouse trying to figure out how to fight a legal system that prioritized biology over safety. "We need a lawyer," Bear said. "A good one. Someone who specializes in family law and custody battles." Knuckles shook his head. "We need more than that. We need character witnesses. We need proof that Austin abandoned this kid. We need to show that Treasure is safer with us than with a man who hasn't seen him in 8 years. But it was Reaper, the quietest brother in the room, who said what everyone was thinking. "We need to be ready for the possibility that we lose. That the court gives Austin custody because blood beats brotherhood in American family law. And if that happens, what's our play?" The room went silent, because they all knew what Reaper was really asking. "How far are you willing to go to protect this kid?" Cisco stood, his jaw set. "We don't lose. We hire the best lawyer in Florida. We fight this in court. We show the judge exactly who Austin Welch is and what he's trying to do. And if the system fails, if they try to give Treasure back to a man who abandoned him, we make sure the whole world is watching. Because the one thing courts hate more than bad publicity is being exposed for putting kids in danger." The custody hearing was set for November 14th in Broward County Family Court, Judge Patricia Brennan presiding. Cisco hired Miriam Castellanos, the best family law attorney in South Florida, a woman who'd spent 20 years fighting for kids trapped in systems that treated them like case numbers instead of human beings. Miriam didn't sugarcoat it. "This is going to be ugly. Austin's lawyer is going to paint you as a dangerous criminal. They're going to bring up your military record, your Hells Angels affiliation, any arrests you've had. They're going to argue that a foster child is being manipulated by a biker gang for publicity. And legally, Austin has standing. He's the biological father. Florida law gives biological parents significant rights even if they've been absent." Cisco leaned forward across Miriam's desk. "What do we have?" Miriam smiled, cold and sharp. "We have the truth. Austin Welch signed away his parental rights 8 years ago. He has not paid a single dollar in child support. He has not visited Treasure once. He has no relationship with this child. And the only reason he's filing now is because Treasure became famous. That's not parental love. That's exploitation. And if I can prove it, we win." The courtroom on November 14th was packed. Cisco sat at the plaintiff's table with Miriam. Behind him in the gallery sat 30 Hells Angels in their best clothes, no vests, no patches, just men in button-down shirts and jeans showing the court that they could be respectful when respect was required. On the other side, Austin Welch sat with his lawyer, a slimy-looking public defender named Roger Cranston, who'd probably drawn this case out of a hat and regretted it immediately. Austin looked exactly like Cisco had imagined. Weak chin, thinning hair, the kind of man who'd spent his life blaming everyone else for his failures. Judge Brennan entered, a black woman in her 60s who'd seen every custody nightmare Florida could produce and had developed exactly zero tolerance for bullshit. "Mr. Cranston, you're petitioning for emergency custody. Make your case." Cranston stood, cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client, Austin Welch, is the biological father of Treasure Welch. 8 years ago, during a difficult time in his life, he made the regrettable decision to relinquish custody. But he's turned his life around. He's sober. He's employed. Miriam stood. Objection. He's not employed. He's been living in his mother's basement collecting unemployment for 6 months. Judge Brennan raised an eyebrow. Mr. Cranston, is your client employed? Cranston fumbled with his papers. He's between jobs, Your Honor, but... So, he lied to you. Continue. Cranston tried to recover. The point is, Mr. Welch is the biological father. He has rights, and it's come to his attention that his son has been placed in the care of, and I mean no disrespect, members of a criminal motorcycle organization. The Hells Angels have a documented history of violence, drug trafficking, and organized crime. My client believes his son is in danger. Miriam stood again, and this time her voice was ice. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the last 8 years of Mr. Welch's life. 0 child support payments, 0 visits, 0 phone calls, 0 birthday cards. In fact, the only contact Mr. Welch has attempted since relinquishing his rights was 2 weeks ago. Coincidentally, right after his son became internationally famous for being escorted to school by men who actually showed up for him. She pulled out a printed screenshot. This is Mr. Welch's Facebook post from November 1st. Quote, "My son is blowing up on the internet. Time to cash in." End quote. The courtroom gasped. Austin went pale. Cranston looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Judge Brennan leaned forward. Mr. Welch, did you write that? Austin stammered. I was joking. I didn't mean... Did you write it? Yes, ma'am. The judge sat back, her expression unreadable. Ms. Castellanos, call your first witness. Miriam called Linda Reyes to the stand. Linda testified about Treasure's 6 failed placements, about how the boy had nightmares about being abandoned, about how the day the Hells Angels showed up was the first time she'd seen him smile in months. Then Miriam called Principal Sandra Yates. Yates testified that Treasure had been bullied relentlessly before that day, that kids had called him Metal Boy and Cripple, that after the Hells Angels escorted him, the bullying stopped, that the entire school culture had changed because kids realized Treasure had a family that would protect him. And then Miriam called Cisco. He took the stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Cranston cross-examined him immediately, going for the jugular. Mr. Porter, you're the president of the Hells Angels Fort Lauderdale chapter, correct? Yes, sir. And the Hells Angels are classified by the FBI as an outlaw motorcycle gang involved in criminal activity? Cisco's voice stayed steady. We're classified that way, yes. I disagree with the classification. You disagree. Mr. Porter, have you ever been arrested? Yes, sir. Twice. Once for bar fighting when I was 23, once for a traffic violation. Both charges were dropped or dismissed. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? No, sir. Cranston tried a different angle. Mr. Porter, why did you agree to escort Treasure to school? What did you get out of it? Cisco looked at Austin Welch, then at the judge. I got to keep a promise to a kid who'd been lied to his whole life. I got to show him that family means something. And I got to prove that the men everyone calls criminals are sometimes the only ones who show up when it matters. The courtroom went silent. Then Miriam stood. Your Honor, I'd like to call one final witness. Treasure Welch. The courtroom door opened and Linda wheeled Treasure in. He was wearing his best clothes, a button-down shirt, khakis, and he looked terrified. But when he saw Cisco, his face relaxed. The judge spoke gently. Treasure, do you know why you're here today? Treasure nodded, his small voice barely carrying to the back of the courtroom. Yes, ma'am. My birth father wants to take me away from Ms. Linda and Cisco. Judge Brennan leaned forward, her expression soft. "Treasure, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to tell me the truth. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you remember your father, Austin Welch?" Treasure shook his head. "No, ma'am. Ms. Linda told me he left when I was a baby because I couldn't walk right. She said he didn't want a broken kid." Austin flinched. Cranston looked like he wanted to object, but knew it would only make things worse. "Do you want to live with your father?" Miriam asked gently. Treasure's eyes filled with tears. "No, ma'am. I don't know him. He never came to see me. He never called. He never sent me a birthday card. And Ms. Linda said he only wants me now because I'm on the news. That's not a dad. That's—" His voice cracked. "That's someone who wants to use me." The judge's face hardened. "Treasure, who do you want to live with?" The boy turned in his wheelchair to look at Cisco, and the love in his eyes was so pure it made grown men in the gallery cry. "I want to stay with Ms. Linda, and I want Cisco to be my dad, not just for one day, forever, because he shows up every week. He takes me to physical therapy. He helps me with homework. He teaches me about motorcycles. And he doesn't care that I'm in a wheelchair. He says I'm not broken. He says I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be." Cisco's throat closed up. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just felt the weight of 8 years of walls crashing down. Judge Brennan looked at Austin Welch with the kind of contempt usually reserved for child abusers and con artists. "Mr. Welch, you abandoned your son 8 years ago because he had a disability. You have made zero effort to be part of his life. You relinquished your parental rights voluntarily. And the only reason you're in my courtroom today is because you saw an opportunity to exploit a child who has finally found stability and love. Is there anything you'd like to say in your defense?" Austin stood, his voice shaking. "Your Honor, I was young. I made mistakes. I just want a chance to what? To collect disability checks? To profit from his fame? To traumatize him all over again?" The judge's voice was steel. "Mr. Welch, I've seen a lot of terrible parents in my career, but you might be the first one stupid enough to put your exploitation plan on Facebook." She turned to Miriam. "Ms. Castellanos, what is your client seeking?" "Full legal guardianship for Mr. Francisco Porter, with the intention of adoption once the statutory waiting period is complete." Judge Brennan didn't hesitate. "Granted. Mr. Porter, you are now Treasure's legal guardian. I'm terminating Mr. Welch's parental rights permanently and irrevocably. I'm also ordering Mr. Welch to stay at least 500 feet away from Treasure at all times. If he violates this order, he will be arrested. Do you understand, Mr. Welch?" Austin nodded, defeated, and walked out of the courtroom without looking at his son. The gallery erupted in applause. Hell's Angels hugged each other. Linda Reyes sobbed into Bear's shoulder. And Cisco walked to Treasure's wheelchair, crouched down one last time, and whispered, "You're stuck with me now, little man. Forever." 6 months later, on a perfect Florida morning in May, the Hells Angels held a ceremony in the clubhouse parking lot. 89 brothers, 30 news crews, and one 8-year-old boy in a wheelchair wearing a custom Hells Angels vest that said Treasure Porter on the back and Protected by Family on the front. Cisco stood before the assembled Brotherhood and held up the adoption papers, signed and sealed by the state of Florida. "Brothers, I want you to meet my son, officially, legally, forever." The roar of approval could be heard 3 blocks away. Treasure beamed, tears streaming down his face, and when Cisco lifted him out of the wheelchair and held him high so everyone could see, the boy raised both fists in triumph. This was America. Not the America you saw on the news or in political speeches. The real America. The one where broken people fixed each other. Where men society called dangerous were the ones who protected the innocent. Where family wasn't about blood or paperwork or what the system said you deserved. Family was about who showed up, who kept promises, who looked at an 8-year-old boy in a wheelchair and saw not a burden but a treasure worth fighting for. And when Treasure asked, months later, what he should call Cisco now that the adoption was final, Cisco smiled and said, "Whatever feels right, son." Treasure thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, "Dad, I'm going to call you Dad. If you believe that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when nobody else will, and that the men society calls dangerous are sometimes the only ones brave enough to protect abandoned children, like and share this story so it reaches every kid who thinks they're unlovable and every adult who's forgotten what courage looks like. Subscribe now for more stories where brotherhood defeats bureaucracy, where loyalty matters more than biology, and where real American heroes wear leather instead of capes. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you, one about another biker who fought the system to save a child, and one about the foster care crisis nobody wants to talk about.